Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Welcome to one and all. I want to begin, as always, by welcoming and embracing all that you bring with you to this space, all that makes you unique, including your beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, and your differences. Thanks for being here. This goes for those who attend regularly through our live stream these days, as well as those who might be joining us more recently or even for the first time today. Thanks so much for being here. Glad to have all of you. Thanks to Todd Milne, who's doing our music live for us this morning, which is going to require me to go back and try to switch cameras the best I can, which explains the hard cuts this morning rather than the soft dissolves. Sorry, but I will do my best to make sure that Todd is on camera when he's performing today. Today it actually marks my 9th year anniversary as the official start of your minister here, and it just so happens that Todd Milne played the music for that service, and he was so kind as to say, I'm going to do it live on your anniversary. So, Todd, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and it's been an honor over these past 9 years, and it's certainly great to have you celebrate with us in this way. And thanks so much to Lisa Conger for being our worship leader today, who was here just about 3 weeks ago, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we talked about this. And I said, you got to put a word in and get back here for Todd's live performances. So here she is. So not only do we have the great benefit of getting to hear Todd perform live today, but we get to have a wonderful worship leader with us too, as an added benefit. So thank you. Yeah. And I wanted to mention that I didn't get to do this 2 weeks ago because I was off, but that was when one of our church members, Bill Powell, passed away, and we wanted to start, as usual, with our mentioning our unity candle on his behalf. Bill Powell, longtime member, died after complications of his cancer treatment. He did pass away peacefully and painlessly at the Rockwood Retirement Community on Sunday, June 20th. Bill was a retired attorney and social justice activist in Spokane and a beloved and devoted and active member of this congregation. A celebration of his life will be scheduled at an appropriate time when the COVID-19 crisis improves enough, at least, that we're able to come together for that. So please do keep his wife, Leona, and their entire family in your thoughts at this time. Let's have just a moment of silence on Bill's behalf. Thank you. I also want to thank you, those of you who have contributed to help our neighbors, the Morning Star Baptist Church, out after an unexpected building and grounds expense, really due to some major plumbing problems. Morning Star Baptist Church, of course, is the congregation that was plastered with white supremacist material not too long ago, stating some pretty disgusting things I won't repeat. So what a wonderful way to reach out to them. So far, you've contributed almost $3,800, which I know is going to make a big difference. We're going to try to get a check to them fairly soon, but I wanted to mention it one more time in case there's others who'd like to contribute before we do so. If so, just contact our office. You can send a check, make it out to UUCS, and just put Morning Star in the memo line. and we'll be sure to send them a big check with as a show of your generosity. So thank you so much to everyone who's contributed and made that so successful at this time. I also wanted to mention that, of course, it's been a rough week for our congregation. It's been a rough year for our congregation, and we've had some big changes in the past couple of weeks in particular, from an election of a new slate of Board of Trustees and nominating team members who are really devoted and dedicated to helping us recover from all that we've had to contend with during the past year. And I know we're still watching some aftermath of the conflict that's been going on, watching some bridges burn, unfortunately. And we're gonna let that smoke clear as much as we can. But I am going to speak more about this situation during my sermon next Sunday. I don't want to do it today, even though many of you are probably anxious to hear what I might have to say, because I am kind of letting the dust settle a bit and see what comes up that I may need to address. But for the most part, I think I want to remind us that no matter the context of our lives, no matter the circumstances we find ourselves in, there is a certain character, which is, by the way, what the word ethos or ethics means, character. There is a certain consistency, something about us as individuals, but also us as a church, a character of our church that continues regardless of the circumstances and context we find ourselves in. At least it should, if we have strong character. And that's how we're going to move forward. It's how we're going to recover. And I believe it is how we've continued to thrive even during the past year, as difficult as it has been. We are called to stand by our values and live up to those aspirations as much as we can, as difficult as it can be for us at times, and to forgive ourselves and others when we can't. So I'm very excited about the future of this congregation. I believe in this congregation, and I look at our history. I look at all of the incredible things we've done to fulfill that mission statement, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice over the years and over the year, including reaching out to Morning Star Baptist Church, our neighbors who need our help. And we're not getting caught up in language and labels right now, but this is a very practical thing we can do to make a big difference to our friends who need us at this time. And these are the sort of things we do as a Unitarian Universalist Church. These are the sort of things we do as the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, and that has not stopped, and that will not stop. So we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. We're going through some tough times, and it feels like there must be something wrong with us, but just read the papers, read the opinion pieces, read all sorts of articles. My friends, we are in something that transcends this church, and it is global. And it is community-wide, and it is nationwide, and it is impacting the Western Hemisphere in particular. And we've suffered because of it. But whether we're experiencing pleasure or pain doesn't stop us from being who we are. As the Stoics say, it's indifferent to being who we are. And that's how we're getting through this. It's how we've gotten through it. It's how we're getting through it. How we're going to get through it together as Unitarian Universalist. So I'll say more about that next week, but I wanted to let you know where I'm at. And as difficult as this has been, I'm encouraged about our future together. Okay. With that said, I will encourage you to take a few minutes this morning to greet one another, as always, virtually. Say hi to your friends and loved ones via email, text, brief phone call, whatever it might be. Thank you. Okay, and there'll be more time to visit with one another following our service, obviously. I hope you'll do so today as well as all week as much as you can. Let's move forward now, however, by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening words is a poem by Wendell Berry, which I find very comforting, especially during these times. The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
Thank you, Lisa. We are now going to have our candles of care. If you want to help us out with that, it would be great. We've kind of switched our candles in Story for All Ages during this time of a bit of a mitigated service. But I do have a couple of candles today. One, a candle for Graham Taylor, who is our church treasurer and a beloved member. As many of you may recall, Graham had a very serious fall a couple of weeks ago and wasn't discovered for a couple of days. Ended up having to have a broken leg, surgery on a broken leg, as well as a hip replacement, and has since been in and out of critical care. He was back in ICU yesterday, and it did not look good. Today I'm told that things are looking better. So please give Graham lots of your love and thoughts and prayers, and whatever is your way of sending somebody the good energy and good vibes that they need right now for lots of love and healing. So please think of Graham at this time, that he can recover from this terrible incident in his life. We miss him and we want him back. And I also do want to have a candle of celebration, a big happy birthday to Barry Lubick, who turned 75 yesterday on July 4th. Barry's also been dealing with cancer treatment and has been responding very well, so that's great news on that front. And Barry, happy birthday to you, my friend. So let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others that you might be thinking of, and if you have virtual candles at home, you're welcome to light those. Lisa's going to be lighting ours here in our sanctuary. those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. And now we are going to have our children's story. Story for the child at heart in all of us. And let's see who has joined us today. Okay, let's see who it is. I don't think I recognize who this might be with the mask on. It's me. Me who? You who? You who? You who? Well, all right. Why don't you stop kidding around and who are you? It's me, Goofy. Ah, I thought so. I guess you're wearing a mask because of the coronavirus, huh? I may be goofy, but I'm not stupid, like some people I know. We won't mention any names. But you know what? I sure do. What? I have it on good authority that humans and say, what are you? Are you a dog or a cow? Well, I'm just Goofy. Well, in either case, we can't catch the coronavirus from each other, so how about letting me help you off with that mask so we can see your handsome face? There we go. Okay, get your ear down here. Good enough, Goofy. All right, so welcome back, and what is exactly is it that brings you to UUCS today? Well, I just thought I'd come and help lighten up the mood. Oh, okay. Well, things have been a bit rough around here lately. Rough. Hey, wait a minute. Does that mean that you're a dog? Because you just sounded kind of like a dog. No. Okay, now you're sounding kind of like a cow. I told you. Well, I'm just Goofy. You hook? Well, I guess it doesn't really matter if you're a dog or a cow because you're a pretty nice fellow, and that's about all that matters. Well, golly gee, thanks a lot. Well, it's just one of those, questions that nobody seems to have an answer to. Well, there's a lot of questions I don't have the answers to. Well, like what? Well, why do they call them buildings if they're already built? Well, that's not something I can answer myself. Anyway, we call those kind of things perennial questions, Goofy, which just means that they're questions that keep coming around because they never can be truly answered. Well, like what? Well, like how do you know what's real or what's true or what the right thing to do is? Those are important questions, but nobody seems to be able to agree about them. Well, it's okay to disagree, isn't it? Well, I think so. Not having all the answers and considering what others think causes us to wonder. And wondering makes the world wonderful. Indeed it does. Not having all the answers and thinking about what others do can really add to the pleasure of the world. So why are you wondering about things today? Well, because I'm going to be giving a sermon in a little bit on philosophy. Why are you wondering about thistle seeds? Are you feeding some birds? No, I'm not feeding birds. I didn't say thistle seeds. I said philosophy. But you know what? Just saying thistle seeds kind of lightens my mood a bit today. Well, that's what I'm here for. Well, thank you so much, Goofy. It's been great having you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Die, everyone! See you, Goofy. Thanks for coming. Okay, he is aptly named, by all means.
Now is the time for our meditation, so please find a receptive posture. Take a few deep breaths as I share this poem written by me in 2004. Laguna Beach Divinity. At the holy altar of the beach, worshipers pray, each in their own fashion. Children, giddy with delight, call out to one another, expressing their natural souls. Families bend and kneel in reverence to tide pool and rock. Others, like barefoot monks, walk their meditations to the chant of the steadfast surf. Vegetation, like a choir, sing out their colorful praises to sun and balmy air. The birds, lay leaders to this congregation of life, lead us in uplifted spirit, while the gentle wind brings communion salt to our lips and noses, here at the holy altar of the beach.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine. In the Meditations, Marcus explains the nature of this social duty. The gods, he says, created us for a reason, created us, as he puts it, for some duty. In the same way that the function of a fig tree is to do a fig tree's work, the function of a dog is to do a dog's work, and the function of a bee is to do a bee's work, the function of humankind is to do humankind's work. To perform, that is, the function for which the gods created us. What then is the function of humankind? Our primary function, the Stoics thought, is to be rational. To discover our secondary functions, we need only apply our reasoning ability. What we will discover is that we are designed to live among other people and interact with them in a manner that is mutually advantageous. We will discover, says Musonius, that human nature is very much like that of the bees. The bee is not able to live alone. It perishes when isolated. We will likewise discover that, as Marcus Aurelius puts it, fellowship is the purpose behind our creation. Thus, a person who performs well the function of humankind will be both rational and social. To fulfill my social duty, to do my duty to my kind, I must feel a concern for all humankind. I must remember that we are humans, we're created for one another, that we were born, says Marcus, to work together the way our hands and eyelids do. Therefore, in all I do, I must have as my goal the service and harmony of all. More precisely, I am bound to do good to my fellow creatures and bear with them. Thank you so much, Todd. I think I saw a little smoke coming off of that ukulele. So my sermon title today is called "The Emperor Has No COVID: How Philosophy Can Be of Help During the Global Pandemic." And I actually, after my last sermon on philosophy a few weeks ago, I was invited to submit an article on how philosophy might be beneficial during this time to a professional philosophical journal. And so that's really the origin of this sermon and my prep for that. And because that'll be material that the journal will really own the rights to, I won't publish the text online, but you'll have the recording. So to begin with, philosophy has long been considered a luxury of those with nothing better to do, of those who can afford to while away their hours pondering matters that don't matter much to the proletariat. This attitude is especially robust here in the U.S., where pragmatism originated in the 19th century, a philosophy that considers the wisdom of the working class much more useful than the ideas of those we might say have hyperactive minds and idle hands. 19th century American philosopher John Dewey, an early pragmatist, complained then that it had become the work of philosophy to justify on rational grounds the spirit, though not the form, of accepted beliefs and traditions. That's a polite way of saying philosophy had become a tool of professional apologists to justify whatever their audiences wanted to hear. They'd become sophists, tongues for hire, not unlike the host on Faux News and BSNBC are today. Prior to the emergence of pragmatism, Dewey says the industrial craftsman was only just above the slave in social rank. His type of knowledge and the method upon which it depended lacked prestige and authority. In ancient times, for example, both Plato and Aristotle looked down upon laborers and craftsmen because their preoccupation with work prevented them from the worthier task of contemplation. This attitude lasted well into modern times, which is why in 1899, Thorstein Veblen famously referred to society's ruling elite as the leisure class, given that working stiffs were still considered intellectually unable to govern. Yet Dewey argued society advances precisely because of the practical adaptations and innovations of workers dealing with real-world problems. Unlike contemplative philosophy, which he says has no aim or purpose or function, except to be philosophy, that is, pure self-sufficing beholding of ultimate reality, pragmatism leads to meaningful changes because contemplation alone cannot help us grasp the nature of things. It is by working out how to change trees into houses, for instance, that carpenters learn the nature of wood. Dewey says it is only by these processes of active manipulation of things in order to realize his purpose that the carpenter discovers what properties of things are. Since the turn of the 20th century, Bertrand Russell writes, the dominant force in American philosophy has been a modified form of pragmatism, which helps explain why Americans in particular think little of philosophy in general, and why academia, which ironically was founded by philosophers for the teaching of philosophy, has increasingly vanquished the subject to humanities departments, along with other liberal arts disciplines that are no longer considered of much value because they don't necessarily lead to a practical living. Pragmatism, to oversimplify, means that if something doesn't work, it's useless. In a pragmatic society, a person who doesn't work is also considered useless, as is an education that doesn't lead to work. This zeitgeist also explains why the thought of turning to a philosophical practitioner or counselor for insight coping into or coping with COVID-19 is unlikely to ever cross the minds of most in our society. Philosophy, they imagine, if they imagine it at all, is forged in the devil's workshop by idle hands and addled heads. After all, their public school teachers didn't waste time allowing the useless subject to interfere with STEM's transformation of our broken children into people who work properly. Their colleges then tucked the impractical subject practically out of sight onto a pile of other unemployable disciplines where it is no longer a prerequisite before graduating and joining the workforce. Today, they know so little of philosophy that the thought of turning to a philosopher for advice about anything, let alone COVID-19, would never cross their minds. Yet our society would do well to remember that pragmatism itself is philosophy, and that long before its emergence, philosophy has often proven to be among the most practical forces on earth. Thales of Miletus, born nearly 2,600 years ago, was the first person known to have explained existence in natural rather than supernatural terms, for which he was considered or is considered the very first Greek philosopher. And despite this giant mental leap forward for humankind, Thales wasn't taken very seriously by his contemporaries either. Plato tells of Thales being laughed at while falling into a well for stargazing during a walk, a stereotype of the comically befuddled philosopher that persists to this day. Thales was also regularly criticized for living in poverty instead of doing something useful with his life. So just to prove how practical philosophy can be, he observed the weather patterns and correctly predicted an abundant growing season. He then quietly rented all the olive presses in Miletus while they were still cheap and of no use, then made a fortune renting them out at premium prices when they were in high demand. In this way, Aristotle wrote, he proved that philosophers can easily be wealthy if they wish, but that is not what interested him. Pragmatism was born of philosophy because philosophy is, by nature, pragmatic. It seeks solutions to our problems and answers to our questions based upon empirical observations, not superstitious and supernatural meanderings. We ignore its timeless wisdom at our own peril. What will happen now if we dismiss the philosopher as a befuddled bumpkin who falls into wells while gazing at the stars, rather than one with the wisdom to observe patterns and make a fortune? And that's an economic as well as a philosophical question, just as COVID-19 is as much a philosophical problem as it is an economic one. Is it reasonable to think that we should turn to philosophy to help get us out of what may become the longest-lasting economic disaster since the Great Depression, even if a vaccine is soon discovered? Consider what it was like during the Great Depression. In factory towns, as many as 1 in 4 workers lost their jobs. In major cities, bread lines were crammed with thousands of unemployed people every day. In the nation as a whole, residential construction fell by 95%. 9 million savings and loans were lost. Savings accounts were lost. 85,000 businesses failed. This description from Robert Hellbronner's classic, The Worldly Philosophers, isn't unlike what we're seeing happen today as a result of the coronavirus. And the worst of it, he says, the most depressing aspect of the Great Depression was that there seemed to be no end to it, no turning point, no relief. Today, due to COVID-19, we are also seeing mass unemployment, long lines at grocery stores of empty shelves, a halt to construction, business closures and bankruptcies, and an unstable stock market, to say the least. Without a vaccine, there is no end in sight, and once there is, we cannot predict the longer-term impacts upon our personal, local, and global economics. Perhaps it is time to turn to a philosopher to figure out the best path forward, just as we did during the Depression. John Maynard Keynes, whom today is mostly remembered as a British economist, was at heart a philosopher, which is why an entire chapter is devoted to him in Hellbronner's book, and why Robert Skidelsky's begins The Essential Keynes with a chapter entitled The Philosopher, explaining that philosophy provided the foundation of Keynes' life. It came before economics. Prior to the Depression, Keynes, like others, could not have imagined such an event. This was so because the normal course of trade seemed to evidence a wave-like succession of expansions and contractions, not unlike a kind of economic breathing, Hellbronner says. Things may have been better or worse from one year to the next, a cycle caused by minor fluctuations in saving and spending, accumulating and investing, but these cycles remained short-term because money is constantly changing hands, turning from income into consumption and back again. Like Adam Smith's invisible hand, this seesaw of savings and investment was considered an automatic safety switch built right into the business cycle itself. By working to comprehend how the unthinkable occurred, Keynes published his revolutionary book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, in 1936, during the very midst of the Depression, in which he made what Hellbronner calls a startling and dismaying conclusion. There was no automatic safety mechanism after all. Instead of a seesaw, Keynes compared the economy to an elevator that can get stuck at various levels for long periods, especially if nervous investors refuse to invest. At the same time, consumer savings run out. And with no money exchanging hands, Hellbronner says, a depression may not cure itself after all. The economy could lay prostrate indefinitely. Realizing this, Keynes recommended something that our capitalist society had never considered, that getting money flowing between hands again would require the deliberate undertaking of government investing. In 1934, before his book was even complete, he visited the U.S., met with President Roosevelt, and urged him to expand what he had already begun under the New Deal, putting desperate citizens back to work on the government's dime. If business was not able to expand, the government must take up the slack. It still took time. But as government investment kept increasing during the Depression, private investors felt increasingly encouraged to do the same, which is credited with finally reviving the economy. So from Thales to Keynes, philosophy has proven to be extremely practical, including when it comes to dealing with the kind of economic troubles facing us now. Perhaps our own leaders should take this page from history to heart and begin consulting a few philosophers. But the bigger financial picture isn't the only consequence of COVID-19 that philosophy can help us with. On a personal level, each of us is being impacted in a variety of ways, facing the possibility of catching the virus and potentially losing our lives, or losing our loved ones, or losing our livelihoods, or of facing another long-term depression. Many of us are experiencing varying degrees of anxiety, depression, and boredom. Philosophers, being that they are neither superhuman nor subhuman, as some might suspect, must cope with these feelings too, and have been doing so with much success for eons. Timid, depressed, directionless, self-loathing, and at times suicidal and unlucky in love, William James hardly seems the stuff of which great men are made of. He was a weak and sickly child who grew into a weak and sickly man during the 19th century. When he traveled, he was most usually in search of a cure for the overwhelming depression that plagued him his entire life. Though he never found one, and even often grew worse or became homesick, seasick, or deadly sick from illnesses contracted abroad, yet James accomplished so much within the context of his sickly life that he is claimed as a preeminent and still relevant figure in a variety of disciplines, including psychology, science, religion, and philosophy. In the preface to Varieties of Religion Today, William James Revisited, philosopher Charles M. Taylor writes, "I hope the narrowness of the focus does not obscure the eerie sense that so many of his readers have felt that this long-dead author is still in striking ways a contemporary." How could James have accomplished so much while overwhelmed with illness his entire life? Perhaps it's because he was preoccupied with philosophy, not with illness. Through philosophy, sickness became merely the context of his life, not its content. The Nobel Prize-winning 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus wrote an entire novel that takes place within the context of sickness, entitled The Plague, written in 1947. It's a great philosophical read that asks us to consider if life was really so good before finding ourselves in a crisis, or if we were ever really alive or free to begin with. But I mention it now only to point out that Camus' choice of sickness as the context in which to philosophize about the meaning of life. The same philosophical question the plague poses is before us today. Is COVID-19 the content of our lives, or merely the context in which we must now live our lives? In How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, about the Stoic philosopher and Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, author Donald Robertson writes that Marcus Aurelius was known for his physical frailty due to chronic health problems, but he was also known for his excellent resilience. How do we explain this paradox? Perhaps the answer lies in the attitude toward pain and illness, Robertson says, and the Stoic technique he used to cope with them. While Marcus, the emperor for whom my whimsical title refers, lay dying of the plague, making farewells to his loved ones, he suddenly passed out, but not quite away. Assuming the worst, however, many in the room began weeping and wailing. But Marcus roused, saw them, and realized how pointless their tears were, just as his were all the times he had so grieved. Marcus knew that death was inevitable. He had been close to it many times in his sickly life, lost many loved ones, many children, and came to see it as a welcome companion, just as he had his sickness, reminding him to live well while he could, no matter what. As he said in his meditations, even the physician Hippocrates, after curing many diseases himself, fell sick and died. Stoicism reminds us, as Epictetus, who lived just prior to Marcus, says at the very start of his handbook, of all existing things, some are in our power and others are not in our power. So simple yet so profound. Some things are in our power and others are not in our power. We should get up every day remembering that, so we don't waste our day. Understanding the difference between what we can and can't control is at the heart of Stoic wisdom. Philosopher William Irvine explains further that there are things over which we have complete control, things over which we have no control at all, and things over which we have some, but not complete control. The unwise waste much time concerning themselves about things out of their control, but the wise concentrate on the things that they at least have some control over. None of us has any control over death, at least not yet, so there is no use worrying about it. We do have some, but not complete control over whether or not we catch COVID-19. So we should do what is recommended by wearing masks in public, social distancing, and washing our hands frequently, while understanding such precautions are no guarantee that in the end, I should say, death will eventually catch up with us regardless. We also have at least some control over our attitude and mindset in such difficult times. Consider this in light of the point philosopher Soren Kierkegaard made in his essay, The Sickness Unto Death, in 1849. In it, the 17th century Danish existentialist makes the case that until death, we are all sick with despair. Such despair, he explains, is caused by being unconscious of one's self, or not being willing to be oneself, or in the very willingness to be oneself. I'm going to name those again. Despair is caused by being unconscious of one's self, one's true self, causes us to be in despair. Not being willing to be ourselves causes us to be in despair. And being willing to be ourselves causes us despair. We can't escape it. There's lots of social pressure not to be ourselves, and being so, standing out in a crowd, can cause a lot of anxiety. Like the Stoics, Kierkegaard is reconciled with the inevitability of death, but what makes us sick to death, or sick until death, is not fully unfolding and achieving our full potential while we are alive. For the same reason, philosopher Erich Fromm considered it the whole meaning of life to develop into the individual that one potentially is, and that the duty to be alive, he said, is the same as the duty to become one's self. If not, we despair, as Kierkegaard said, or remain not fully born, as Fromm puts it. This is an important point to remember during COVID-19, which is giving us lots of reasons to despair. So it's best to acknowledge that much of what's happening is out of our control, while concentrating on that which is within our power. Things like attitude, mindset, opinions, ethics, and meaning. Distinguishing between the context and the content of our lives is especially important right now, and philosophy can help us do so. In his newly republished book, Therapy for the Sane, How Philosophy Can Change Your Life, Lou Marinoff does so by also distinguishing between disease and dis-ease. Disease and dis-ease. These days, almost everything troubling us is labeled a disease and treated as such, often with medication, even if we're only feeling a bit of dis-ease in response to the usual ups and downs of life. Life is not a disease, Marinoff exclaims, and its trials and tribulations over which you sometimes experience dis-ease are not symptoms of a disease either. So discovering and keeping a healthy mindset during this time of dis-ease during a disease is especially important. Dealing with disease requires treatment as well as a positive mindset. Dealing with dis-ease requires a positive dose of philosophy. So I recommend a little bibliotherapy to help with this. Take 2 books, Marinoff's Plato Not Prozac and Therapy for the Sane, then call me in the morning. Since ancient times, philosophy has asked about the meaning of life and continues to ask us to consider the meaning of our own lives. That's the whole point of Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl's classic, Man's Search for Meaning, that we can endure just about anything so long as we can find meaning in it. Erich Fromm, who considered boredom the opposite of meaning, once said, "If I were to imagine hell, it would be the place where you were continually bored." If our lives have meaning, COVID-19 is only the current context within which we must pursue that meaning and fulfill its purposes. If you've not yet clearly contemplated the meaning of your own life, now is a good time to put philosophy into practice by doing so. You might even employ a philosophical practitioner to help you along the way. Epictetus once asked, "What do you think would have become of Hercules if there had not been a lion, as in the story, and a hydra, and a stag, and a boar, and unjust and brutal men, whom he drove forth and cleansed the world of them? What would he have done if there had been nothing of this sort?" Without the challenges he faced, Hercules would have been unremarkable. What would we be without our challenges? What would we be without COVID-19? More importantly, what can we become in our response to it? Thank you.
This is my philosophy and my prayer, I guess. Make us aware of the truth and beauty around us, the truth and beauty within us, and the truth and beauty we can transform into the world. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.